Hi everyone, welcome to Telling Our Story, Stories of Authentic Representation of Disability in the Media and Advertising. Today I'm so excited to join a panel basically focused on thinking about how do we authentically represent disability. For me as a person with cerebral palsy, I grew up really never seeing disability represented in terms of kind of as a professional or as having a family. I think we've traditionally either seen disability in a very medical context or as children. So today I'm really excited to bring together some leaders from marketing, advertising, communications to have an authentic conversation about what representation and disability means to them. So again, my name is Bryan Stromer. I'm a product marketing manager at Microsoft, and I also lead our disability in marketing group. I'd love to just get our panelists to do a quick 2-minute introduction each of who they are, what their job is, and also what has been an example of representation of disability that they thought was really authentic, either in media, advertising, the movies. So if we can start with Christina, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Christina Malan. I run inclusive design and accessibility at Wunderman, Thompson, and WPP. And at night, I am the late stage co-founder of Open Style Lab. And an example of advertising that I think really represents me and how I look at myself as a person with a disability is Maltese's ad called Dance Floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Okay, Meghan, you're up next.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. I'm Meghan Carpenter. I lead diversity and inclusion communications and events for Microsoft. And I'm also chief of staff to our chief diversity officer, Lindsay Ray McIntyre. For me, when I think about representation of disability, I go to TV. And I will be honest, I have some pretty high requirements when it comes to how I think about effective representation. So in a TV show, I think about the 5 things of they need to not be the villain, they need to not be the victim, they need to not be magical or have superpowers, they need to have actual lines, and they need to be reoccurring. Bonus points for sure if we show intersectionality, and so representing more than one marginalized identity in a character. So the example that comes to mind for me is Jillian Mercado's character on L Word Generation Q. So as a Black queer woman, seeing someone who is Dominican, queer, disabled, uses a power chair, and extra bonus points is an immigration lawyer is a pretty good symbol of representation and what's possible if people really prioritize the space.
That's awesome. Thank you, Meghan. And then Storm.
Hi, everyone. My name is Storm Smith, and I work as a producer at BBDO LA for AT&T. And one thing that comes up in mind about disability and representation and intersectionality, let's go back to what I'm currently doing as a producer regards with diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. For the production side, to support, the cross-functional team to make sure, we're inclusive and tell an inclusive story. So understand what comes to mind relating with the TV show, media, advertising. One thing that I can think of, the TV show, Grey's Anatomy, the character, she's deaf, a deaf doctor, Dr. Lauren Riley. But she's played by Shauna Stern. And the firefighter, Nell DeMarco in Section 19. Netflix, The Politician. Natasha. They are really playing their roles of the firefighter, principal, doctor. And it just happens that they have a disability, but they still represent positivity, and that we're the same. So really, it's inspiring to see more and more increasing with that. and we still have more story to tell.
Thank you, Storm. That's such a great example too around having people with disabilities play characters with disabilities is a great way to start. Taras, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. I'm Taras. I'm the Chief Creative Officer for Wunderman Thompson's North American offices. Joined about 3 months ago and was a month in the office, then has been quarantined since, like everyone else. So it's been an interesting evolution from there. There's, the way disability has been represented in advertising, I think has been something that I've always taken notice of because it's represented one way and they try to include someone with one leg running or doing something amazing in an ad with just to make sure they're checking off the boxes. But there was a series of ads that were done, Visibility for Disability Initiative, where they took a group of people with disabilities, but had them doing normal things. They were eating breakfast, folding laundry, showing them doing these normal everyday things as a point to get by the awkwardness of, of course they live normal lives like the rest of us. And it was really powerful. And when they put them into testing, it was really interesting the way, because then they filmed the testing as well. And it was a really powerful representation of the idea.
Thanks so much, Taras. I think all of you raised a really great point around kind of just representing disability as a normal part of life, as part of that human experience, and not just superheroes or doing extraordinary things, but really as a part of normal life with those intersections that we all experience in different ways. So thank you so much for each of you giving that introduction and that example. I wanted to go to Meghan, and I know you talked a little bit about how you kind of look for authentic representation in television. And I wanted to build off of that and ask, how do you bring authentic representation into your role, really leading communications for our global diversity and inclusion group here at Microsoft?
Yeah, it's a meaningful question because, I think as everyone sort of shared in their introductions, there's a thin line between storytelling and reality. And it's super easy in an attempt to express something or make a point, especially when you think about disability, to sort of go to one or two extremes. So extreme one is you want to make the person seem perfect. Nothing's messy. They are, beyond human. Look at these amazing feats that they are doing, to quote unquote overcome their disability. Or it goes in the other extreme and it's very messy. They are a victim. They are helpless. And so when we think about sort of employee storytelling and bringing diversity and inclusion to life for Microsoft, we really think about how do we allow employees to genuinely show up as themselves and to share the parts that are messy and the parts that are, extraordinary without feeling like you need to go to one of those two extremes. A lot of that requires you to get out of the way. I think one of my biggest learnings around storytelling for any identity is creating the space for people to just share authentically, originally, from their heart, from their mind, without trying to craft too much. Amazing things, of course, can be done in editing to be able to keep a story moving. But the more that someone who's trying to do this work can get out of the way and allow the person to share their own story instead of crafting it for them, I think helps immensely. When I think about sort of my own experience, it's funny, the other day when I was talking to Bryan to get ready for this conversation, I actually don't think I realized until recently the ways in which my own personal disability story is a tech story. So you think about how it's super easy for us as Microsoft to want to talk about how technology helps people do things, but making sure that it's actually genuine and authentic. So for me, a little bit of my story is I struggle with small motor skills and fine motor skills. And so as a young kid, I loved writing. I loved storytelling. It's something that I've always had a passion for from a really young age. But what I discovered and my parents realized early on was that actually gripping a pen or a pencil to be able to write was very painful and very difficult for me. For years, I got really bad scores on handwriting in school when that was a thing. And it wasn't until our family got our first home computer that I could actually type, which was easier for me, that allowed my writing to come to life and allow me to really embrace my passion for storytelling. And many years later, now working in technology, I don't think I made the connection when I made my career choices. But looking back, that was a life-changing thing for me. Now, that's a small story. It's not showy. I am not climbing any mountains, but it is showing the ways and the small ways that technology can help bring this to life. And so that, in my mind, is the ways that this can show up in real ways and powerful ways for a brand or even for internal efforts to drive culture change.
Thank you, Megan. That's a great point and a great reminder for us all just about how technology can really empower us when it is accessible. And just to note, we're just coming off of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, so it's been exciting to see how brands like Microsoft have activated on that. Storm, I wanted to jump to you and really ask about how, as a creative, do you bring the concept of intersectionality into your work and into the work that you're doing on behalf of your clients?
Thank you for that question. The first real thing that I think about, for anybody's experience as well, you go to the eye doctor. You go to the eye doctor in terms of, the eye doctor has that, the machine, the lens machine, has all these different lenses that they'll add or take away, and they'll keep adding, to fit for your prescription for your glasses and your vision. And so metaphor. So what does that mean? There's no one size fit all. So with our current diversity and audience, and it's constantly growing and modifying so fast that oftentimes with disability and intersectionality identity oftentimes isn't discussed, or it's rarely discussed, or it's overlooked. So in this space of misunderstanding and advertising and media, medical space, we're not there yet enough where we can gather the stories to discuss and to really represent. So that's where now we come in as a producer. I did see a challenge for that, where I had to propose to have DIA, which is diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, for the production side of our big client, AT&T Entertainment, to make sure that we're inclusive, just like inclusive story, characters, the language, the dialogue, how it looks, they behave, everything. Really, if you think about it, currently during COVID, 80% of the consumers right now are media consuming. So of course, many of us are so hooked with watching our online videos, 100 minutes every day. So I'm sure we want to see ourselves in that character story regarding with the brand, the product. So, and not being able to deliver that, we're missing the audience, the market, that for relativity. So it's our responsibility to incorporate intersectionality into our brand, our clients. It's really essential. With considering, we're quote unquote $21 billion worth of the market. That's the unreached market that we need to take advantage of. So with that being said, really, really grateful for my director, Rachel, and the manager director for BBDO LA. She's really supportive in this initiative and this action plan that I've been working on with my account director to make sure that we're implementing the plan, implementing the steps, implementing the results, because we already had the conversation. We've been having the conversation, but now, nope, conversation put away. Now we need to start doing the work so we can see more results at the end. So one thing I found that's really interesting, I think several months ago, based on the findings in this, approximately about 55% of people really see people on disability on the screen. They're uncomfortable when they see that. I'm like, really? How can we change that and become a more positive light? It's our responsibility to make sure that we deliver the story accurately and representationally, authentically, and of course, in a positive light, whether they feel inspired or whether it's a normal story. A normal person that happens, to be a doctor, a firefighter, engineer, doing their thing with humor, so, we can see that and go, oh, and we see the brand with it, and we feel we can relate. So for the consumer and the brand and the intersectionality in mind, one thing I want to point out, there's no one focus on a person with disability. It's a person with disability has multiple identities in different spaces. So that influences their decisions, influences their thinking, influences their behavior. So that's a lot. So it's really important to recognize them, recognize the group, recognize the market, and incorporate that for our brand. So really, and push that to make this happen so you can see it in advertising specifically for our clients, but in the future of advertising and storytelling. So we all have a responsibility and part of the solution and not the problem.
Thank you so much, Storm. I think, that point you raised about I think it was 55% or 50% around identifying as being uncomfortable when they see someone with a disability on screen speaks to some of the challenges that people with disabilities face in society. I know for me, my walk sometimes is confused with if I'm coming from like a really great happy hour. I like to say my happy hour is my every hour because it can be confused with someone who's a little bit off balance. But I think, and I've seen how people react uncomfortably to my walk. So I think really that point also speaks to how does that look in a job interview if they're uncomfortable with you being on screen? What does that feel like if you're walking into a job interview? And then I also really liked your point around thinking about we're not done yet or we're not there yet. And with that, I think, Christina, I wanted to jump to you and say, as someone who's leading inclusive design at one of the largest advertising firms, what do you think brands need to do, or how do you get brands excited about really being inclusive of disability in their work?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good question that I get asked a lot. And I think about, as a person whose both arms are paralyzed, I look at the experiences that, where I felt bad about my disability, and a lot of it linked to media. And it was because people didn't see someone like me that lives a very happy and successful life with the disability. So when I talk to brands, I look at inclusion as a two-pronged approach. One, representation, and the second, accessibility. And from a representation standpoint, I think brands need to ask their agencies and their internal marketing teams, how diverse are your teams? What are the makeups to ensure that different POVs are creating the content that is getting pushed out by that brand? And then when it comes to accessibility, I think it's making sure that you have a plan in place and a kind of scorecard to make sure that everything you create, from your tweets to your Instagram posts to different sections of your website, making sure that it's accessible, because there are legal restrictions and requirements in the United States for accessibility, but also, you want your brand to show that it cares about people with disabilities. So I think, those two approaches, I feel as though if brands take them, they can become a more inclusive brand. And as we know, 70% of consumers would rather buy from an inclusive brand than a non-inclusive brand, and will pay more for that product because it comes from an inclusive brand. So really talking to brands and showing them, the reasons why, just because, it's a good thing to do, but also there are business prerogatives when it comes to investing in inclusion products and advertising for their company.
That's a great point around really showing the value of investing in this area, like you said, and it's not just a feel good, but it's really a business imperative. Terrace, I wanted to ask you, as a creative leader and as someone who is so well respected in the advertising industry, how have you advocated and championed for inclusion of disability and this lens of accessibility in your work and in your agency?
Yeah, well, I think, it's what I've come to understand is that it starts very early in the storytelling process, rather than, I think where it's left to, where it's not authentic, is when it gets left to casting, let's say, when it gets left to, we need to fulfill or check off a box to make sure we're representation. As a storyteller, I've come to really, open my eyes, especially as a creative leader, to the more diverse stories we tell happen when we intersect diverse minds. Now, you think that's, kind of, so, it's kind of obvious, but I think you grow up in advertising where it's represented primarily by white men. The stories get told are, very much about white men. And then when stories get told about other, races or people with disability, it comes across as inauthentic. But I think what we really try to do now, and I try to help my other creative leaders understand, is that, not only will the stories be, authentic, but they'll just be that much better when we're intersecting different backgrounds, and people are bringing different ways that they've grown up. The stories will be richer, the stories will be deeper, and they'll just be that much better.
That's a great takeaway. I think that this idea of just they will be better because they are representing these areas that maybe we're not talking about on screen, but they definitely exist in our world and in our everyday life. So we have about a little bit over 20 minutes left for our panel, and I wanted to just take a few questions that we've received from the audience, but I also wanted to just start and kind of jump back to a point that Meghan had raised about, and Meghan, in your work around really making sure that you're not overstepping or you're allowing our employees to tell their own stories. I wanted to just ask you how, as again the head of our communications for global diversity and inclusion at Microsoft, how do you make sure that our employees feel comfortable and feel safe sharing their stories, especially when it is kind of asking them to be a little bit vulnerable?
Yeah, it's a really difficult challenge. I'm not going to pretend like it's easy, and I'm not going to pretend like we sort of have the magic answer yet. I think what we see is, because we are using storytelling as a way to drive culture change in the company, to make our company more inclusive and candidly make the tech industry more inclusive, we know that the storytelling sometimes has to be a little ahead of the actual culture change. So sometimes we're having employees tell stories that candidly we know the audience may not be ready for. And so that comment in the stat that Storm shared earlier about being uncomfortable with seeing diversity representation on screen in the disability space is something we see across all identities. And so we have to make very intentional choices about how far we're going to ask an employee to go. When I think about sort of Microsoft's commitment to diversity and inclusion, sure, we want to push change. We are forever, I think, in Microsoft continuing to be willing to take some risks to drive change. But we also have an obligation and accountability to protect the humans. It's very different from when you're including an actor in something. And even if they have a disability themselves, they're playing a character. Or if you think about somebody who's very public externally and sort of an activist in this space, and they're used to having sort of a public profile. Once you ask an employee to do that this isn't their day job or that they haven't necessarily done this before, I think that the passion and the eagerness to engage is very energizing, but recognizing that there's still some risk there. The reality is good, bad, or indifferent across a bunch of different identities. There continues to be a need to make sure that there aren't situations where employees sharing their personal identity can sort of result in a backlash against them. That might be, in the worst cases, from other employees within a particular company. In more common cases, it's when we promote stuff on social media. Trolls, as we all know, will show up in pretty much any space. And making sure that that employee understands that risk, and making sure, candidly, that we take every step and every moment to check in on them. And so when we do our employee storytelling, earlier this year, we actually did a campaign that showed up not just internally for Microsoft employees, but we also started to bring diversity and inclusion to life at our external flagship events. So when we're having big events to talk about technology or development or our partners and our customers, we also talk about D&I. And so we activated this employee story program. Bryan was kindly a part of that program. And we pulled together 12 employees of a bunch of different identities across race, ethnicity, age, military service, faith, and of course, representing both physical disability, but also mental health, and how that shows up in the workplace. And we had these employees share their stories. Now, we crafted this initial thing way back last June, July. And so it was over a year ago that we started this. Every time we use that content, before we use it, I actually reach out to every single one of the participants and I say, hey, we're about to use this at this new event. Here's the audience. Here's the way it's going to be shared. Here's the people that are going to be able to see it. Are you still in? And so rather than assuming that they've sort of given you permission to use their personal story in any sort of venue, I keep going back and checking in and saying, understanding their life situation may have changed or how they feel about talking about this issue may have changed. And I give them a chance to kind of opt out at each touch point to allow for that. And it might feel like sort of an over-engineering and an overstep. But again, if our responsibility is protecting those people, that has to come first before the work and before the culture change. The good news is we have seen consistently within our company, in the places when we do this well and we do this with care and we think about all of those things and prepare those employees to understand the potential impacts of this, it is driving change. So we're seeing other employees say, oh my gosh, to have this employee share their personal story, let me know that I can be more open about my experience. It let me know that it was safe to have these conversations. We're hearing managers and leaders say, until you shared this story with me, I never thought about how this might be impacting my employee with a disability or of a certain background. And now I have a way to actually broach the conversation with that employee because there's something that we're actually pointing to. So I don't have to call out their situation. I can talk about how hearing the story impacted me. So it's driving conversation in a new way that we were hopeful for, but candidly didn't know if it was going to turn out the way that we wanted it to. One of the concepts that we're talking about here at Microsoft is the idea of covering. So there's an academic, Kenji Yoshino, who wrote an amazing book on this topic. Please check it out, Covering. But it's really about the space in between showing up as your full authentic self and being in the closet or hiding about a certain part of your identity. Covering sits in the middle of that. And that's when somebody knows something about you, but you still try to minimize or hide it to fit in at work. And so for my own story, the thing about not being able to write with a pen or a pencil and needing to be able to type, the number of meetings that I've been in where I've sort of, they've said, oh, put your tech away, put your laptops away to show you're engaged, use a pen to write, and having to call out the fact that I can't actually do that. It's not that I don't want to engage, it's that I need to be able to type to be able to engage or take notes or write during a meeting. And so my choice to say, I'm actually going to be more upfront about that, as opposed to just pretending like I can hang in there, is a choice to make sure that I uncover, to make it more of a conversation and to allow people to talk about it in a more direct way.
That's awesome, Megan. And I think the biggest takeaway for me from that, and I hope for everyone in the audience too, is just at Microsoft, we're continuing to learn and we're continuing to think about the best ways to do this. So we don't know it all, but we're trying to learn and innovate. We have about 10 minutes remaining, and I wanted to ask kind of a final question to Storm, Christina, and Teres, and I wanted to ask basically just all three of you are from the agency side of things, and I kind of wanted you to just think about, in 10 years, what would your ideal vision for how disability in advertising and media look like? So starting with Christina, so about 3 minutes each, if we could keep it at that.
So in my dream world, in 10 years' time, every ad would either tell a story or show someone with a disability in 1 out of 5 ads. And why I want 1 out of 5 is because 1 out of 5 people in this world have a permanent disability. So I want the advertising to reflect the current demographics of the world. And then also, I would love to see more people with disabilities in senior management. A lot of the times when we've discussed this here, that, brands check off the role for disability employment by having people that are in level jobs. But are we putting the time in to make sure at these agencies and at these brands that we're giving enough employee coaching so they can move up the ladder, or that senior leadership that's already there, that they feel open to talk about their disabilities? And then from an accessibility angle, I would love to make sure that every single ad we produce is accessible for people with hearing impairments and vision impairments. So much of the ads that I see out there, I think it's only 4% of ads are accessible. Making sure that we're having the brands and the agencies and even the platform partners are making sure that everything is accessible out there. And that's what I think about and dream about when I think about the 10 years into advertising, what the world of marketing and advertising will look like in regards to accessibility and inclusion.
Thank you. And the reason I actually ask about the 10 years is this is the 10-year anniversary of the Ability Summit. So I think it's exciting to think about, from our advertising and marketing profession, what will this look like in 10 years? Storm, I'd love to hear your point of view on this.
I agree with Christina, definitely. And considering 10 years ago, there was just a starting point of conversation and action. And now we have an amazing leader, our current panel talking about this, dominating the industry. But we're here and we have the position of power and influence and making a big impact and generating high results and high numbers. So for the next 10 years, I definitely want to see more of the same. For example, accessibility shouldn't be having a conversation. Oh, bummer, we forgot to put the caption in. Oh, we forgot to add the audio descriptions. Oh, bummer, we forgot. No, we should be incorporating that as a standard with the KPI metric. So that measuring and making sure that we are keeping up with the positive numbers. And if we miss 1 or 2 steps, that's okay. We're not at the point where the numbers are so high that accessibility is not implemented. And, with the goal lopsided the numbers for accessibility, the standards there be same with the measurements of, we'll see more like Christina said, 1 out of 5, 20%. Let's see more stories, inclusive stories with inclusive characters, with intersectionality and in the brand and in the product, advertising media, TV, more of the standard to become, oh, it's normalized, amazing stories. And as a whole world, less about the ability, like we're celebrating for who we are, because we deserve this, to be seen, to be heard, to feel. And that new level is where I would like to see in 10 years from now. And also, not only just to generate stories, but also to hire more people with disabilities, plus multiple identities in the workspace, because that definitely will bring a unique perspective, experience. They can lead and become officers and directors and managers, and they can lead, and we can generate the work, and then we can have our bragging rights. We are doing this. So that's something I would love to see in 10 years from now. So we are in a perfect time. We're great leaders. So it'll happen within 10 years.
Thank you so much. That's it. Those are 10 years that I look forward to, a future I look forward to. And then wrapping up our panel today, I wanted to ask the same to Taras. What do you envision kind of this industry looking like in regards to disability inclusion in 10 years?
Sure. I mean, look at from Christina and Storm, great answers. You were only supposed to give one, and you each gave 5. So I appreciate that. But let me help to build on a few of those, because I think they were really wonderful. One, which I thought of first when Storm mentioned subtitles and these elements of our communications that just become thought of as add-ons. And there really shouldn't be, right? Like Storm saying, they should be incorporated from the beginning. And I think making them accountable and actionable and being able to track them and, making those, whether it's Nielsen scores or testing results, connected to how the ad performed with those elements. And I think that would go a long way for people to really think of them more than just an add-on. I think the other idea that Christina touched on was the, how does our media become more useful? I think we lived in such a fragmented media landscape, yet so much of the media that gets concepted is a story with a beginning, middle, and end in the form of a television commercial. I think we can go a long way to expand how we're connecting, how we're using our media, and working with tech companies like the Microsofts of the world to create our messaging, to create our advertising authentically from the beginning. So we're not just thinking of, oh, how do we adapt this story that was initially created for TV and now make it accessible to everyone? It's like, well, no, it's not going to be. So we should just start at the beginning of thinking, how do we create something that's accessible to everyone? Something of this sort might end up on television.
That is awesome. I think how do we actually quantify it? That's something we speak about a lot at Microsoft. And also, how do we make sure that it makes it through this whole process to television, and it kind of makes it from just being an idea or a brief that someone is advocating for to actually being something that we can act on. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left, and I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for everyone who for joining us, our panelists. I encourage everyone watching to just follow all of our panelists online, on Twitter, connect on LinkedIn, because I think this is the group that is going to continue to advocate for change and continue to make the progressions that our industry needs to see to really start reaching that idea of authentic representation. I know for me, I went into marketing again because I never saw someone with a disability, and I still haven't actually working and having a job. And that's a pretty revolutionary thing to be able to say, like, I still can't think of ads that feature that. So I'm excited to continue to push forward. And I know at Microsoft, we are just getting started on our accessibility journey too. So thank you all for calling in, and stay connected.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bryan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.